With the 20th anniversary of Guild Wars Fun and the Return to Guild Wars Fun unofficial event organized by Loranity, there is a lot of people who are returning to the game, and there are also a lot of people who are asking, should I try Guild Wars Fun? And my short answer is absolutely yes. However, it kind of depends. But first of all, a small little introduction. As some of you may know, my name is Noxy, and I've been playing the franchise for nearly 20 years. Not exactly 20, I'm missing a few months, but I've been there for quite a long time. The second thing I wish to mention is that this is not a guide, I merely want to talk about the game and some of its flaws and how to approach the game. So I will talk about each expansion as well, but I will first talk about the game overall. So you might have heard before that Guild Wars 1 is such a great MMO, but the mistake is that Guild Wars 1 is not a MMO exactly. It is a multiplayer online game, but it is actually a RPG. And even in that, I would rather label it as a co-RPG rather than a massively online. I mean, it is a multiplayer game, of course, but it is mostly just in the outposts, which are technically the lobbies. It also has some similarities to deck building games because of how your builds and skills can work, and with the entire dual classing or dual professions rather. So the game requires learning, and you have to remember that the game was made at a time where strategy guides were a thing. They sort of expected you to have these guides in real life, of course, or even digitally, and read them, just like how they provided guides to the games physically, and those guides explained some mechanics of how they worked in the game. While I know it may sound a little bit mean, but if you can read and you have some level of comprehension, you should be alright in this game too. Now here I would like to compare Guild Wars 1 to Guild Wars 2, and if you came from Guild Wars 2 and never played Guild Wars 1 before, so you can know what to expect from Guild Wars 1. First of all, both games gives you a wide variety, range of tools and skills and everything that you can work with. However, first of all, in Guild Wars 1, you will be punished if you don't know what you are doing. It's not a game that will hold your hand very gently. It will always punish you for small mistakes that you can do, and it will punish you to the point where you just have to rethink your life basically. Well, not literally, but it does punish you very harshly, or can to the point where it's very harsh and you have to just simply restart from scraps, or so to speak. You have to remember that in Guild Wars 1 there is a lot that plays into how you manage to succeed. Versus if you take Guild Wars 2, the problem I kind of see with Guild Wars 2 is that the game gives you a lot of tools and everything, but it refuses to punish you. It just doesn't want to punish you for bad decisions. Now, that doesn't mean that Guild Wars 1 is an insanely difficult game. That's not the case. But the game wants you to adapt, to change your build, to always strategize and think. So moving on, this is the crucial point of the video first, where before I talk about each individual expansions, I would like to mention, if you are absolutely new to the game, which expansion you should start in. And for that, I have to say, if you absolutely care about the story and it's very, very important to you to play it chronologically, then just go start with Prophecies. I can't really change that. And again, I'm not telling you how to play the game. I'm not forcing you to do it the way I'm telling you, but I would like to inform you about a couple of things here, okay? That's all I'm trying to do. Now, however, if you're indecisive and you can't really decide where to start, and the story not exactly the 100% most top important thing for you, I would like to advise you to not start with Prophecies, which is the first one. In order, the game releases were Prophecies, Factions, and Nightfall. And then there is an actual expansion, which is not standalone, which is Eye of the North. As I go on, I will explain why I'm saying this. I just have to mention it here at the sort of start of the video, because I have experience with friends and people who I knew and know that tried out Guild Wars 1, who started with Prophecies, and merely few days in, they just completely left the game and sort of never returned in most cases, because they found the game way too difficult and slow. Also, I have to mention that just because the game is difficult, that doesn't mean it's bad. I'm not saying that Prophecies is bad and don't start with it. I'm just telling people who are absolutely new to the game and would like to try it out to rethink if you wish to start with Prophecies, because indeed it can be difficult or very different than what you would expect. And now I would like to talk about each individual expansions a little bit to have a sort of understanding what do they offer and what you can do in them. Oh, and of course, before I forget, you have to understand that each standalone campaign has a sort of tutorial zone or part of the game that you start in. For example, in Prophecies, you have pre-Searing Escalon, in Factions you have the Shinji Island, and in Nightfall you have Istan. Hey guys, editing me, and I just wanted to take the opportunity to talk a little bit about the professions. So in Prophecies, you can only access the base 6 professions, which is the Warrior, Ranger, Monk, Necromancer, Mesmer, and Elementalist. And in Factions, you get 2 extra professions to your selection. You can select Assassin and Ritualist as extra. And in Nightfall, instead of being able to pick Assassin and Ritualist, instead you have Dervish and Paragon. And here I would like to mention 2 things quickly. First, it will be the Monk. The second one, I would like to talk about melee hit. But first of all, Monk. I played Monk from the get-go of the game when I started back then, and I played it through even to my GWM title, and I have to say, out of my own personal experience, it's not fun to play, especially if you end up playing with only heroes or henchies in the end. It's just generally not fun to play. While it does have some goofy build that you can play that can be fun, sort of, for a while, but I have to say that especially in Prophecies, which I will talk about, Monk is absolutely boring and probably the worst to play, and that comes from personal experience. Now, second thing to talk about quickly is the melee hate. Generally, at the start of each expansion, you won't really experience this too much, but the more you go in gradually, the more you experience this, that if you are a melee player, you will struggle more and more, and the less you can do, usually. Obviously, being melee will put you into a slight disadvantage by needing to run up to your enemies, but mobs have a lot of snare. They will slow you down, they will knock you down, they will blind you, they will put hexes or conditions on you that basically just makes it impossible that you can make a hit, or they just outright shut you down by, even when you are attempting to hit something, they will just interrupt you immediately. Also, a lot of mobs just in general use block skills. So I would say that for a new player, if you're absolutely new, you might have a very harsh and bad experience with playing melee versus a caster, but once you get more experience and you understand how to play the game or how to get, especially from Eye of the North, yes, I know there is a skill called Azura Scan, but it's not really much of an argument here, because if you are a new player, you will not have access to this and you will just suffer. Yet again, this is an advice, not a rule that you cannot play melee, but I'm saying as a heads up that if you end up playing a melee as a first timer, you might unfortunately have a very bad distaste in your mouth in the end. Just keep that in mind. So let's talk about Prophecies. Why is it so difficult, or why do I say that it's so difficult to start with? Well, you have to know that the game isn't difficult. Prophecies isn't more difficult than Factions or Nightfall or any other part of the game. It's just the different sides of why does it feel difficult. First of all, Prophecies, or the first game, the base of the game, was made with PvP in mind, not PvE. The game was designed originally to teach you how to PvP and how to get into PvP, and just generally how to learn to play the game. It wasn't there to give you a story. It wasn't designed to have a storyline or any sort of meaningful PvE part. It was just there as like a filler, because it was supposed to be a PvP game, like I said 700 times, PvP. It's based on PvP, and even after finishing Pre-Searing Ascalon, no spoilers in the story, but your quest to get out of Pre-Searing is literally a small little quest on showing you how to PvP in a PvP arena. It's literally about PvP. And this is also the reason why the game at the start, during this tutorial zone or tutorial part, doesn't really explain much about the game in depth. It just gives you a very generic, superficial understanding of the game, that, you know, there is healing, there is damage in the game, you can move, like all these things. But it's not in depth to the point where you would understand the game, where you can properly play. It's simply so minimal because the game as a PvP game was not really popular by idea, so they added PvE into the game, and that's why Prophecies starting and Prophecies itself is very wonky in terms of gameplay. I don't know how to say. But anyway, Prophecies is very slow-paced, deliberately. Kinda gives you that old-school MMO feel, where everything is kinda just slow and you want to enjoy just leveling and just slowly going, that kind of vibe. But it is also slow-paced and feels difficult for multiple other reasons that is not exactly combat-related or such. For example, the party size is very limited from the start. It grows very slowly. So to understand, at the start of the game, outside of Pre-Searing Ascalon, once you get out of the tutorial, the party size is 4 people. Now, the maximum party size in Guild Wars 1 is 8. typically for PvE. You get to keep the 4-man party until maybe about 20-25% into the game, and then it turns into 6-man for quite a long time until you finally, around maybe, I would say 70% into the game, it finally turns into an 8-man party. Now, there is not much problem with this, but it does make it more difficult because you have less people or henchmen or heroes to work with. There is less in your party, therefore a lot of things turn more difficult or can be more difficult. And talking about party, if you are not playing with players and use henchmen, because, there is just not enough players or people around. Even back in the days, some people didn't really like to play in party and they just like to play solo or alone with henchmen. At the time, heroes didn't exist because heroes came with Nightfall, but I will mention that later. So you have to understand that in Prophecies, if you pick henchmen, just due to the design of the game and their probably design philosophy of the game, of difficulty and such, they probably don't really want to incentivize you to use henchmen, and they probably wanted you to use henchmen as like a very, very last resort at a time. And because of that, henchmen are always under-leveled compared to the zone where they're heading into. And they are also very scarce, and by now they have very bad builds, by the way. They have very bad skills in most cases. So unfortunately, even now, at this very time, they became very, very obsolete, sort of, but even if not obsolete, at least very useless, most of them. And because of how they are handicapped, it gives you even further more difficulty if you try to advance solo alone with just henchmen. Now, the other thing that also makes it somewhat difficult is that making builds and making your own build can be very difficult because skills are very scarce in Prophecies. Buying them from skill trainers or getting them from skill quests is either a hit or miss, because sometimes even in pre-searing Ascalon you can get a couple of extra skills for your profession through a couple of quests, but even after you are done with pre-searing and play the main game, the rest of the campaign, it's very rare to buy skills from skill trainers because the skill trainers are very scarce and just placed here and there through the campaign, or skill quests are also sometimes hard to find, or you just don't know where to find them, or they simply offer a very useless skill or spell that you could use and it really doesn't help you. So yes, building your own build in Prophecies is genuinely hard and not really too satisfying in my opinion, and never was. Even when I played very first time with my friends, first ever in my life, at the start, which was way different than now, it was a struggle. Getting elite skills, which is very important as well, into a build was very much a struggle because they are a rather late game thing in Prophecies, at least. So crafting a build, or just putting a proper working build together in Prophecies is just genuinely can be a struggle. Of course, this is very dependent on what profession are you playing. So in general, in short, access to skills is very limited in Prophecies, including both elite skills and normal skills that you could use. Again, I do have to mention before people jump at my throat that Prophecies is also a very great expansion to play. It's a must play as well. But people have to understand the Prophecies is indeed not for everyone. And sometimes it's just simply not for new people. And I know that from my own experience. And that's why I'm always telling these and try to inform new players before they try the game and just blindly go into Prophecies, because I indeed had several people in my life who tried it out and just completely ditched the game and never came back even giving it a second chance. And I want to absolutely avoid that because this game is precious to me. I love the game. I love Prophecies. I love Factions. I love Nightfall. I love Eye of the North, but I mostly love Factions. But yes, I do love the game, and I just want people to avoid this frustration of going into Prophecies and them just completely giving up on the game. Okay, so it's finally time to talk about Factions. I think when they were making Factions, they took a lot of criticism from Prophecies because Factions is sort of not exactly, but in many ways it is the opposite of Prophecies. For example, Factions is very famous for being very, very fast-paced. Not in combat, but in the gameplay, the story, and just in general, it's very fast. The starting tutorial of the game is way more solid than it is in Prophecies. Like I said again, in Prophecies, the tutorial zone was mostly there to just lead you into PvP and just kind of give you a taste of PvP. It was not in mind for PvE. However, in Factions, they did a very good thing, and I think out of all of the expansions in the game, Factions does the tutorial zone and the tutorial part of the game the best. Obviously, it is probably still flawed, it's not that, but it's compared to the rest, it's probably the best. They went really hard on trying to explain the core of the game, mechanics, and just in general how professions, skills, and how different type of skills even work. It tries to be very, very in-depth as much as it can be without being just too much. Now, the faster pace mostly comes from the fact that you can level very fast and you can get out of the tutorial zone relatively pretty fast. But the sort of downside to this is that while leveling is faster, it comes with a small twist in this case, where the difficulty spikes rather fast from the start. Now, don't misunderstand me. In Prophecies, the difficulty is pretty linear. It's always difficult from the start till the end. Obviously, in the pre-searing area, it is relatively easy because it is still a sort of a tutorial area, but in Factions, it starts way lower. It makes it very, 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 very easy, almost unfailable in most cases. And then once it knows that you are done with the tutorial part of the game, where the game tries to explain everything to you, that like, you know, there are missions, there are these kind of skills, there are these professions, it will immediately throw you into the deep water. And it will expect you to know everything, to just stand on your own. And if I could give a comparison to this in Guild Wars 2, if you ever played Guild Wars 2 of course, I would say the difficulty spike is about similar to finishing court area, where you can barely fail anything, it's very easy to do, and then suddenly you find yourself in Heart of Thorns. If you know what you know. Going back on the tutorial feel of it, I actually really love Factions tutorial part because it goes pretty in-depth about trying to explain skill mechanics. For example, how to interrupt your enemies, how to disenchant enemies, how to remove or deal with hexes and conditions on you, how to use defensive skills to stay alive and survive a little bit longer, snaring your enemies and such. And there are of course also a lot of individual profession quests that is more aimed at your own profession, of what your profession can actually do and how. And to mention, even your very first mission that you will do in Factions is a huge tutorial mission, which kind of makes it a little bit long, but it's kind of a funny mission to me because of reasons.
It is madness, I tell you! Madness!
But also because it tries to help the player to explain some of the UI elements that you can see and use for information. It's a really weird mission because it's in story, but it also heavily breaks the fourth wall just to explain your UI that the player itself can see, but your character can't. And while I'm still talking about Factions, the reason I'm telling usually people to start with Factions is because, yes, it is generally faster paced for leveling and in general for gameplay, but it also explains the game way better than Prophecies does about mechanics and skills and everything. It's much more new player friendly than Prophecies for sure. It's not more difficult or less difficult in my opinion in the end, but it does start a little bit more soft and handholdy, and then it kind of just lets go of you. Now it's time to talk about Nightfall. Nightfall is a very middle zone of Prophecies and Factions. They kind of ironed things out. It's like they took both worlds' goods and slammed it together, making a perfect expansion. Never mind, they just had to ruin it with one, two, three things. Okay, some jokes apart, Nightfall is pretty solid regardless. They kind of dropped the tutorial quests for professions and skills and such, and they kind of just left in a training zone that you can go back to all the time and just try out things and just talk to NPCs about skills and professions and skill mechanics, which is not bad, but I have to be honest, it's so easy to miss. The problem is that Nightfall introduced heroes, and Nightfall mainly just teaches you how to control and how to flag your heroes, to move them manually one by one. It doesn't really go over the, oh, you have these skills and that skills and this skill mechanic and such. It just teaches you, okay, you have heroes now and you can control them. You can send them around, you can gear them up and such like that. And now I do have to talk about heroes a little bit. Heroes were welcomed in a very mixed way, at least at the time when Nightfall released. Between me, my friends, the guild and everyone I knew, everyone had very differing opinions about heroes. Now, I will try to talk about heroes in a sense of what it is currently. So you don't really have to worry about heroes that much, because heroes for you in this state and age of the game where you will very likely play solo and not really with players. You can still play with players, obviously. You can have friends or other people, you can still bump into people. There are still people playing the game. But if you end up playing more solo, in many cases, you can just use heroes, and they are way better than henchmen, which is good because you have a more solid and more controlled party composition. And here I also have to explain to you that in Nightfall, they introduced a new sort of thing that frustrated many players, including me, and I still hate it, and many people still hate it. The fact that missions to progress, a lot of them, like 95% of the missions, except maybe 3 or 4 missions at the end, they require you to have a specific hero, which is simply annoying, because if you have a solid team composition, you have to suddenly add a hero into your party that might be not leveled or doesn't even have a build or any gear on it. Probably doesn't even have a weapon apart from its starter weapon, and it just kind of hinders you. So now you're forced to throw out at least one hero, or even mercenary if you have it, or if you have any, to put in a hero that is very likely absolutely and utterly useless for you and for your party. But regardless of this small and kind of inconvenient frustration that you can get from heroes in Nightfall for the missions they are required, Nightfall is good if you want heroes and better team composition that you can control a little bit better. However, in terms of story, just in short, Nightfall will ruin Factions and Prophecies story for you. But Factions, if you start in Factions doesn't really ruin the story of Prophecies, and then you can just continue Nightfall still after you are done with Factions. That's why I usually advise to start with Factions, because it's less spoilery about Prophecies, if at all, actually. So as a small conclusion for the end, I just have to say again, you can play Prophecies. I'm not saying to absolutely avoid Prophecies, I just want you to know that Prophecies can be difficult for a new player. If you never played the game before, or don't really know the franchise or RPGs or anything such, then I'm just asking you to rethink. If the story very much matters to you, then obviously just start with Prophecies. Don't care about what am I saying or what anyone says. But if the story is less of a thing for you, but you still want to go to the story regardless, then I would advise to start with either Factions or Nightfall instead of Prophecies from the get-go. So one of the main things I do have to mention before I end this video is that the mobs you fight use the same skills as players. That will be obvious. However, when the game was put on maintenance mode, we had a huge balance patch beforehand, and it buffed quite a lot of skills. It also sort of reworked a lot of professions on how they work. And because of these changes, since enemies or mobs use the same pool of skills as players, they've been buffed as well. There are regions or zones of the game now, especially in Prophecies as well, where some of the mobs can deal way more damage than they were designed originally for. So you can't really just tell me that, oh, just play authentically, because the game isn't authentic anymore. That's what some people don't understand, because there are people who always tell that I want to play authentically, but I just tell them that I'm sorry, you can't. You can pretend that you are playing authentically, but the mobs you are fighting and what you are facing are not authentic anymore. They are not designed anymore as they were. They've been buffed, and some of them are ultra buffed beyond what you can handle if you are absolutely new to the game. That's why I'm saying that Prophecies can be more difficult than it was before, because back in my days as well, I can say too, some of the areas were much easier than it is nowadays. And I'm not saying that you can't deal with these mobs. I'm just saying that they are not the original design anymore that they were. Just like how Mesmer mobs or Mesmer enemies were more of a very annoying enemies to annoy you and snare you, cripple you and everything. Now they can just outright nuke you because they've been changed how they work. But anyway, ramble over, that's all I wanted to say. I just hope that it will help some people out so they don't just ditch and quit the game without giving it a second chance. So some people can be prepared about how to approach the game or any of the expansions.